WNST, the couch in the condo for me, sitting around. It was 60 degrees when the weekend started. It was like 16 when it ended. But 4 teams march on. We'll have some interesting football this weekend, but much like in these here parts, there are 28 other places where they have their nose pressed up to the glass. This guy is one of my nomadic NFL journalism friends. He, at one point, covered the San Diego Chargers. They were no longer in San Diego. When they went to L.A., he went to Las Vegas, but really lives in Oakland these days, covering the Oakland Raiders, soon to be the Las Vegas Raiders, for the Las Vegas Review-Journal. He's my pal Michael Gehlken. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at Gehlken NFL. That's Gehlken. And I know I will see you out in Minnesota, and you're going to be getting ready for the draft and all this other stuff. But I tell you what, you got a little exhale going on. It's you've had a wild beat out there on the Raiders here this year that got a little crazier when Jon Gruden came into your life, right?
Yeah, never a dull moment. You know, you had no doubt as to what the scale of the introduction that it would be with Jon Gruden being introduced as the Raiders head coach as he was earlier this month, but actually being there at that press conference, and there's 230 chairs, 115 credentialed media members, about 40 player alumni, among them maybe about 10 Pro Football Hall of Famers. I mean, just the scale of Jon Gruden being back with the Raiders. You mentioned it, where the Raiders aren't in the mix of the postseason any longer. They never qualified this year, but they found a way to make a lot of noise here in January.
Well, I mean, let's go backwards and let's talk about Jack and talk about the season, and then I'll pull the whole thing forward. And obviously you were on the Chargers beat for a period of time, and they were the surprising team, sort of, kind of. And, had there been an 18-week season, maybe they would have made the tournament. And we certainly feel that way here about 4th and 12. And you feel bad about everything until you're the Saints this morning at this point, Mike. But I guess for the Raiders, high expectations. My relationship with Jack and Rod Woodson and Tyson, all those guys that were mixed up in that thing there, and Norton out, and all the changes that were made, and the quarterback injury. I saw Jack Del Rio at the owners' meetings last year. I didn't think he was a guy in trouble for his job, and I sort of kind of thought he would have made it to Vegas, because I sort of kind of thought there would be a couple 11-5s and 10-6s and maybe one Super Bowl loss in there or something before they get to Vegas. But, boy, things change very, very quickly in the National Football League, don't they?
No doubt. And Jack Del Rio's been in this business long enough to know the fluidity and know that things can change in a hurry. That being said, I'm sure he was probably right there with you to a certain degree. You sign a 4-year extension, as he did last February, and certainly the expectation would be that you won't be let go at the end of the same year on New Year's Eve, which is what happened with Mark Davis notifying Jack Del Rio that he was dismissed following a 6-10 campaign. It's pretty bizarre, even in this league, for that extension to happen in February and then that news to come in late December. I think that's probably part of the reason why, for a lot of people, kind of caught them off guard that this move was made. Not so much that none of us should have been surprised for Mark Davis to add Jon Gruden, given the search, about 6 years he's been working toward or hoping for Gruden to be back with the Raiders. But just as it applies to Jack Del Rio, it would just seem that he would have been allowed a little bit more time than he ultimately got.
Boy, everything went wrong, right? And I guess for a lot of places where there are higher expectations, and again, I cover the Ravens for a living, Mike, so I know about these sort of high expectations, but that bar was raised by how they played in the 16th season, I should say, leading into 17, and I don't know that you ever just get right back up with a quarterback that has that kind of an injury, whether it's Tom Brady who's had that injury, or Carson Palmer, or Joe Flacco. Now we're going to see Aaron Rodgers coming back from that from a different kind of injury, but certainly once you've had that kind of an injury that takes your season away, it changes things. As you judge the Raiders in totality this year, fair to blame it on Jack?
Boy, I think it's more complex than that. I think a lot of people would do a lot of things differently as they look back on the 2017 season for the Raiders. Imagine, for Jack Del Rio, when he looks at it, you saw the way the defense improved down the stretch when it was under John Pagano, those final 6 games. Those first 10, however, under Ken Norton Jr., they just, from an execution standpoint, from a detail-oriented standpoint, the Raiders just weren't where they needed to be. And of the things maybe Jack Del Rio could have done differently, which perhaps could have affected his ultimate fate, and maybe he'd still be the Raiders head coach today, might be if he had made the move around this time last year, and rather than keep Ken Norton Jr. as the defensive coordinator and hire John Pagano as his assistant head coach of defense, just go ahead and bring in Pagano to be the guy whose fingerprints all over the defense, to be the guy who's calling plays defensively, and to be ultimately the guy that Del Rio, without any sort of hesitation, was just leaning on and trusting his defense. And that's ultimately something that he waited until November, and maybe he waited too long by that point, where the season was. I think the defensive struggles for the Raiders were far more impactful across the whole team than a lot of people really properly say, or at least address or acknowledge. I think part of the reason why we're talking about Derek Carr having kind of a letdown year from a statistical standpoint following that injury that ended his 2016 season, I think a large part of that letdown is because the defense really got in the offense's way a lot of times. It was pretty unusual, some of the things that was happening for the Raiders defense the first 10 games of the season. 0 interceptions, the first defense in NFL history to have 0 picks after its first 10 games of the season.
That's an incredible stat, dude. The first team in NFL history to go 10 games, first 10 games. That's a wild one, right?
Yeah, and then the completion percentage was the second highest in NFL history, on pace for that. And then quarterback passer rating allowed, the same thing, second worst in the NFL after the first 10 games. So under Ken Norton Jr., and you don't just want to pin it on one guy there, but with all the improvement that the Raiders showed under John Pagano, it certainly led many to think, wow, maybe if Del Rio made a move differently the previous January, maybe we're sitting here today and the Raiders season would have gone a bit differently.
Michael Gehlken covers all things Raiders. He's the beat writer at the Las Vegas Review-Journal. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at Gehlken NFL. That's Gehlken. A longtime Chargers coverer who moved on to Vegas when the Raiders moved. Dude, it's so complex right now, right? We're waiting on this Bisciotti press conference here. Fans are pissed. They're pissed about the knee. They're pissed about the offense. We haven't made the playoffs in 3 years, 4 out of 5 years now. I'm re-releasing Purple Rain 2 that's now 5 years old, Mike. So it's been 5 years since the Ray Lewis March, and we're going to put him in the Hall of Fame in a couple of weeks, and we're running buses out to Canton in August. But meanwhile, the football team here has trouble selling tickets now all of a sudden, which is a problem that they've had in other places, but that problem has not been here over 22 years. It's been a very, very long honeymoon, and I don't know what dog and pony show needs to be rolled out, but in Oakland, it's a whole different thing, right? I mean, that press conference felt like a Vince McMahon production, and Gruden feels like that they've hired Ric Flair to coach the team or something. And here's a guy that was a 500 coach at the end. Certainly, was a nice addition to Monday Night Football and a reason to watch and all of that. But the jury is out on $10 million a year, but they're getting their money's worth off of his ring, right? And selling PSLs and all of the show that goes on beyond winning football games, which is all Jack really had to do was win football games. Gruden's going to have to sell beer, right?
Yeah, there's a marketing aspect of, and I'm sure there's more to it than that from Mark Davis's standpoint. He said several years ago he envisioned leading his team, Reggie McKenzie as general manager, who has been in place now for a few years, and Jon Gruden as head coach, who became in place, obviously just recently. And it wasn't necessarily about Las Vegas in terms of why he brought in Jon Gruden. It's not that simple to Mark Davis. His love and affinity for Jon Gruden, but the effect is clear. I mean, you look at. I was at Las Vegas not too long ago, about a few days ago, for a staff meeting, and you just got the sense in that city of what Jon Gruden means, and just the excitement where people just know definitively that Jon Gruden is going to be the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. I think it helps people kind of visualize what it's going to be like, what that moment will be like when the Raiders take a field in Las Vegas for the first time. Likewise, I think for people in Oakland, Jon Gruden is back. Since he was traded following the 2002 season, it's been, it's been, or 2001 season, it's been 9 different head coaches. Just such instability. Jack Del Rio actually was there the longest.
There's been 9. Let's see if I can name them all, right? So let's see here. Cable, let's go, because he was the most interesting of all of them. Cable, Hugh Jackson, right? Jack is 3, right? Who's that?
Lane Kiffin.
Kiffin?
You've got some.
I would have forgotten him. Who was the college coach? The coach that was a Super Bowl coach. It was 16 years ago now. Come on.
You got Dennis Allen as well.
Dennis Allen, okay.
There's a list.
More than I can name. I mean, it's kind of like naming Browns quarterbacks or something like that.
Yeah.
So Michael Gehlken covers all things Raiders. We're trying to come up with coaches, but at least we know who their quarterback's going to be. Dude, what is all this quarterback nonsense I hear about franchise quarterbacks? And you and I run off to Indianapolis in the cold in the dead of winter looking for the next great Carson Wentz to come along. And we look up, and here's Blake Bortles, Case Keenum, not to be confused with Stoney Case, who was once going to lead the Ravens, as well as the Cardinals and the Lions and some other teams to the Promised Land, and Nick Foles. And then there's Tom Brady. And I saw Vegas likes Tom Brady a whole lot here to win another championship 2 weeks from now in Minnesota.
Yeah, it's a quarterback-driven league, and then we always knew that. But then you see what it looks like, and you're reminded that it's not as simple as that when you have some of the quarterbacks. Certainly in the NFC Championship that there is in this tournament today. And as far as the Raiders are concerned, they're just trying to get Derek Carr back on track. And for do that, they need more talent around them, and that's the key. And for the Raiders, I think you're going to look at their wide receiver core, and it's going to look totally different in 2018. I don't expect Michael Crabtree to be back. Seth Roberts cost a lot of money with his March bonus structure. Johnny Holton is someone who ran a lot of routes, too many. Cordero Patterson, another guy who isn't as necessarily as polished as a route runner as they'd like for someone who's going to see that many snaps. So I know I kind of localized it back to the Raiders, but from a national standpoint, it's a reminder of just what it takes to get to make a run. It's sure a lot easier when you have Tom Brady, but you can also get hot at the right time. So the Raiders, they still believe they have the quarterback, but they need to surround him with more talent.
We forgot 3 names. So Bill Callahan was the name I was going for. Norv Turner was the head coach of the Oakland Raiders in 2004 and 5, 9 and 23. Art Shell had a ill-fated 06, 2 and 14 run that was about that forgettable. I remember the first run on him. And we forgot about Tony Sperano, who was wearing the shades on the sidelines on Sunday. So, I don't know how we forgot about that 3 and 9 era, as though it was pretty recent. As well. And, hey, man, you left the Chargers beat. You shocked that they performed as well as they did? Maybe there was more remnant left there, and maybe they've drafted better. And certainly as I see the Falcons and the Saints and the Eagles and certainly the Jaguars, this really is about getting young players on the field. And when you can do that, you can hang around and play football in December as the Chargers did, right?
Right. Honestly, not surprised that the Chargers did perform so well, and they very well could have been playing in January had they not lost their first 4 games of the season. Special teams, the kicking game really let them down and curtailed what could have been a more promising campaign than it was. But no, I actually, to be totally frank, I remember being in Napa, California for training camp, watching the Raiders, and I told a fellow reporter when we were just looking at how the Raiders were practicing and just how the team looked. I said, I think the Chargers, even though the Raiders were coming off a 12-4 season and the Chargers were coming off, I believe, a 5-11, I remarked that the Chargers are better, a better roster. I thought I wasn't watching a team that was superior in that regard. And I'm not saying that because, it's easy to say that now, but just truthfully, you look at the Chargers and the way they're built when they're healthy. They have Joey Bosa, who's about as good of a young defender as you're going to find anywhere in the NFL, and Melvin Ingram across from him. There's a pretty darn good combination. You saw both of those players had double-digit sacks, and the cornerback play with Casey Hayward and Jason Verrett, a player I really like who didn't stay healthy this season. That's been an issue for him. And then the quarterback, and Melvin Gordon as a running back. Keenan Allen, who's so good when healthy. We were able to see that this year. I mean, it's pretty good, both sides of the football right there at some pretty key positions that they have. The Raiders was pretty confident. Everyone understood what Khalil Mack is and what he means to a defense and his impact, and certainly we're reminded of that this past season. But there seemed to be too many questions at linebacker in the secondary, and then even offensively in some regards for the Raiders. So I think there is. It's not going to be so simple for Jon Gruden to get the Raiders back to where they need to be. You have obviously the Chiefs, who, despite their playoff struggles, have certainly shown the ability to be difficult to a top when it comes to the divisional race over the course of the regular season. And the Chargers, and while the Broncos, they seem to be pretty entrenched as the number 4 team in this division. They still have Von Miller, and if they can patch things up from an offensive standpoint, they tend to play pretty tight football over the course of the year.
He is Michael Gehlken. He covers all things out there on the west side in Las Vegas. He's covering the Raiders right now after a long stint with the Chargers. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at Gehlken NFL. That's Gehlken. He is with the Las Vegas Review-Journal, where the circus is coming to town. All my friends are going to hockey games out there and waiting for the rock and roll to roll in, and you'll be up there in Oakland. When are they really going to get on the field in Vegas at this point? Like, what's the real money say on that? 2 more years in Oakland?
2 more years in Oakland. That's the current expectation, and they still need to extend their lease. Right now, the Raiders, as it stands, without the lease extension, 2018 is the final year of their lease, and then 19, their Las Vegas Stadium isn't going to be anywhere close to being ready, and then so they need to figure out where they're going to be in 19. But the expectation is that they'll get their lease extended at the Oakland Alameda County Coliseum. So the Raiders will play there in 2019.
San Antonio, baby, that's what I say.
And then, I agree. Yeah, I mean, honestly, that'd be the worst thing for me personally. That's another relocation.
San Diego's got a stadium sitting down there. Rent that for 6 months, I mean, let the Raiders go down there and play.
I mean, the Raiders wouldn't mind that, but that'd be terrible.
Don't never say never, man. I mean, the Jaguars are 4 quarters away from going to the Super Bowl.
That's true.
Hey, crazy things happen, and I know, and I've asked you this before, and I want to ask you again, just getting the temperature, because the last time I had you on, I think it was maybe right as the season was getting going, and we played the Raiders. We were out there the week my cat died. I didn't come out to Oakland, as I remember it, and the back end of the Wembley and all that nonsense. The Chargers leading this nomadic existence. Is there ever going to come a time where you and I are going to laugh about this 8 years from now, and they really have a fan base of 72,000 people that come to games? I sort of marvel at that decision. And, again, the Jaguars could be in the Super Bowl this time next week for all we know, and that would really hustle that London thing that Shad Khan has been trying to do over there, and they actually sold tickets last week in Jacksonville. But I look at the Chargers thing and think to myself, how is that ever going to work now that the Rams have sold a couple of tickets and sort of squatted on things in and around LAX, kind of, sort of, right?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that place rocking in Inglewood once the stadium is built. The Chargers being able to fill that game or fill that stadium to capacity with a pro Chargers crowd in Los Angeles, that's a hard thing to envision. I think relocation is difficult on any fan base. I mean, yeah, it includes an organization such as the Raiders. You know, it's difficult for a lot of people in Oakland to know that they're going to be losing their favorite team. You know, to suit their, you know, it's like family when a team moves away from a region.
I'm familiar. I was 16 when the Colts left here, so yeah, I've written books about that. Yeah, so
right,
I mean, I was the guy on the phone with you, and I was sitting next to you out in Scottsdale when the poop went down and Mark Davis moved the franchise, and I'm like, they're not really going to play in Oakland. I mean, I remember having a cocktail with Del Rio saying, "You're not really going to play in Oakland, are you?" And they have not ripped the stadium up so far. I mean, I'm kind of blown away by that. I really am, Mike.
Yeah, all fan bases are different, and the Raiders, you know, the quote-unquote Raiders Nation, it's legitimate. It's amazing just to see how fans are still riding, by and large, with this franchise. And
dude, that never would have gone on over here. I mean, you know, there was no way Bob Irsay could have come back and said, well, we're going to play 84 and 85, and we'll move to Indy in 86. I mean, my God, that just never would have happened anywhere. I mean, it's really a unique thing.
No doubt. And so what's happened with the Chargers, I mean, it's totally different. You know, you don't have that feel in San Diego the way it is here in Oakland, where there's still that support by and large. You know, there's still, you know, more than most are still on board. You know, in San Diego, you know, so many people are just not even following the NFL at all anymore. There's just a really a pall across the whole county because the Chargers left it. And so when, you know, the Chargers, who weren't exactly, you know, rich when it came to numbers of Chargers fans in Southern California already, but when Dean Spanos did what he did, and for a lot of fans, the way that he did it, really rubbing people the wrong way, I think that's part of the reason why it's hard to envision the Chargers, you know, of Los Angeles and their new stadium when it's built being a place that's going to be a real home field advantage for them. The Raiders, it's different. You know, Las Vegas, I don't think, even though it's going to be a different kind of town and there's still some question marks on how they're going to fit in, you just know that there's going to be Raiders fans from all over California who are going to make trips, you know, weekend trips to Las Vegas. There's going to be a community there in Las Vegas just ready to embrace it. That's been very unique for the Chargers, where you didn't really sense that excitement. You know, anytime a team joins a new market, that new market has an excitement about that team's arrival. So Las Vegas has that, where the Raiders, I mean, you go on the list, but the Chargers, you know, they don't seem to have that, or didn't seem to have that awaiting them in Los Angeles.
Well, and certainly in this particular case for the Raiders and moving to Vegas and everything that envelopes that franchise. Look, I've been coming out there for 20-some years now to football games. It's always been dumpy. It always feels poor. It always just feels poor. Everything about it feels subpar, especially when guys like you and I fly around to other places where even in Kansas City, the stadium's 50 years old, but you know, there's a sense of pride and all that goes into it. And you were in San Diego where the thing was kind of falling apart, but there was some pride in the shield part of it that the Raiders have always been the poor place or the weird place, that this Gruden thing, that all of a sudden, like, Davis feels like he's playing with money to pay the coach $10 million a year. The Raiders were never the ones that ordered the champagne, right? It sort of feels like they're putting that thing on for Vegas to become sort of this grand franchise that I think you can only be when you play in a place like Las Vegas. You can't be grand when you're playing in a dump in the East Bay, right?
Yeah, I think there's something to that. You know, Mark Davis, it's been pretty remarkable just to see how he goes about making moves for his franchise. And not every owner does some of the things that he's been doing. You know, not just moving to Las Vegas, which when you're given the amount of public money that he was given, you know, $750 million, it makes that a lot easier to do. But just, you know, going after, you know, Marshawn Lynch, making these huge extensions for players, you know, Derek Carr's contract, the richest in NFL history. Well, that's less of a surprise, but still, just going for it. You know, Jon Gruden, 10-year, $100 million, going for it. I mean, I think it's the way he's been over this past year, and just being also mindful of the optics of whatever he does in Las Vegas and whatever he does in Oakland, you know, playing to both fan bases at once. there's a lot going on with the Raiders organization across multiple states, and it's a bit of a balancing act to appeal to your current market while still appealing to your future one, and not, insulting your current one because of your future one. I mean, there's a lot going on there, but they've done a pretty masterful job of that thus far, and so it's just as a beat reporter who's covering them for almost a year now, it's pretty. You kind of just notice different aspects of the organization and the ownership and just other pieces of the puzzle in terms of those who are managing the team, and they've done a pretty good job of building excitement in both markets at once, with Jon Gruden being a big piece of that.
It's all exciting until you get $9.99 pay-per-view press conferences with Gruden coming up in 2020. So I'm sure we're getting there, but as long as they're free, enjoy them. I'm sure you'll be getting a notebook full out there in Las Vegas covering the Raiders. Always great to catch up with you, my friend. I hope to see you in Minnesota as well as in Indianapolis, where we're selecting 16th and hopefully getting someone for Joe Flacco to throw the football to. Mike, always a pleasure, man. Great coming on with you, man.
My pleasure, Nestor. Take care.
You got it. Michael Gehlken. Gehlken NFL is the way to follow him out at the Las Vegas Review-Journal. He covers the Raiders, really covers the league as well as the Chargers. He is a great resource and a lot of fun to have on the program. I like the smart guys. You can find me out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from wherever you happen to be. Our morning newspaper ships to your email inbox free of charge each and every morning at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life here in 2018. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live right here on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. Don't forget as well, we have our Purple Rain 2 release coming daily, a chapter a day, every day, for the next 20 days leading up to Super Bowl 52. You can check out today's chapter in the morning newspaper or check it out at WNST.net. Last but never least, any breaking news when the Ravens make a move, when the Orioles deal Manny Machado to the Arizona Diamondbacks, you'll get it first on the WNST text service. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis Kolatzis will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, driving you home as he does every Thursday on the SSV on WNST. It is championship game weekend, one in Philly, one in Boston. We'll be in Minnesota in 2 weeks. And, of course, we have our bus trip to Canton, Ohio for Ray Lewis and the Hall of Fame induction. It's the weekend of August the 2nd. More details coming your way. You can send me an email if you want to get on that list. It's nasty@WNST.net. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.